Listen to your favorite shows live and on demand 24/7. Download the 77 WABC mobile app now. A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Joining us now is Fox News legal analyst Gregg Jarrett. Greg, you wrote a column about this. I can't believe that they cut a deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the right-hand guy to Osama bin Laden. To me, the evidence was clear as day, he and the others, and now they get to escape the death penalty. If there's ever a case with the death penalty, isn't it this one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this guy confessed to the point where he bragged about his heinous deeds as the architect of the 9/11 attacks, killing, 3,000 people. He said, I was responsible for the 9/11 Operation A to Z. And beyond that, there was a mountain of evidence that supported conviction and the death penalty. But the government over 21 years our government has incessantly blundered. There's been a revolving door of lackluster judges, inept prosecutors. A decade ago, I wrote a column describing the incompetent handling of what was essentially a straightforward, easy case of criminal charges. But Barack Obama stepped in at one point in time, and he really mucked up the works because he decided to drop all charges and bring the case in federal court. And, of course, the public condemnation was deafening. Congress took action and forced him to reverse course. So that caused inordinate delays. And then, of course, unscrupulous defense attorneys, filed motion after motion, appeal after appeal. There were so many prosecutors and judges that came in and out of the case. You need a calculator to keep track. And now the Biden administration has thrown in the towel. And Joe Biden, oh, gosh, I had nothing to do with this. Don't believe it. He had vowed to close down Gitmo. To do that, he had to give a sweetheart deal to these despicable terrorists, and he did it.
Yeah, it is really crazy. Judge Weinberg.
So that's the question I was going to ask you, Greg. What does the United States of America and the people of the United States get out of this deal, other than being snookered?
They get absolutely nothing. And, the people I feel for, and I know some of them, are the long-suffering family members of the 3,000 victims. They expected justice, they deserve justice, and they are angry and disappointed in their own government's craven surrender.
So it's one more deal that Biden does for political purpose by misusing the justice system.
Absolutely. And he doesn't even have the courage of his convictions to admit it. Instead, he's saying, oh, gosh, this was the military tribunal, and it's handled by the Department of Defense. I didn't even know it. Baloney. He knew all about it. He directed it. He insisted on it to fulfill a campaign promise and, to try to troll for more votes in that way.
Ed Cox.
And the worst that he did was when he wanted to announce on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 that he got all our troops out of Afghanistan. And for that shallow political reason, he pulled the troops out despite all the advice that he got from the military and from his own staff, simply for that cheap political point.
Yeah, and then, of course, he famously couldn't even remember that he had received adverse advice. People finally stepped forward and said, yeah, we told him not to do it. It was going to be a total mess. But Biden, in his senescence, couldn't remember that he had been told not to do it. But, this is the problem with a senile president who's not in control. It is a national security risk to all Americans.
And the consequences are terrible. Russia invasion Ukraine. I mean, the weakness, what it showed, America is still suffering from it.
Right, exactly. And, that also emboldened Iran to, launch through Hamas and Hezbollah their attacks, as heinous as they were, on innocent Israeli citizens. So, this is a president who long ago, lost control of his own presidency. I don't know who the shadow president is. It's probably a committee of progressives that are running things, and they periodically trot him out to read a teleprompter that they've written for him, and he has trouble doing that.
I want to ask you about some other news, Greg, that just came down, that this New York appeals court has rejected Trump's appeal to lift the gag order that's on, the New York case. The case is over. We're like smack in the heart of election season, and a New York appeals court says, no, the gag order still has to stay in effect, stay in place through the sentencing, which is in September. Who knows if that gets pushed down? I mean, this is ridiculous. The case is done. How is this not election interference?
It's both election interference and an egregious violation of the First Amendment right to free speech. Especially a presidential candidate who's been targeted with specious lawfare brought by acolytes of Joe Biden and Biden's own Department of Justice. He has every right to defend himself in the court of public opinion. This just demonstrates to me how biased politically and crooked the New York court system is.
And Greg,
I would hope that federal judges would step in and say this is fundamentally unconstitutional.
And what people seem to forget, and you've pointed this out on numerous occasions, there's two parts to the First Amendment. It's not only Trump's right to speak, but your right and my right and Rita's right and Ed Cox's right and John Caspi's right and everybody else's right to hear. And that's being denied us.
It is for, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans. And I pointed out ad nauseum all the time that it's not just his right that's being violated. It's every American's right who has a right to listen to speech they may want to hear in a contested, important presidential election.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that it's continuing. By the way, I don't know if you saw this yesterday. We were talking about this earlier, that when he went before the National Association of Black Journalists, President Trump, the interviewer was just, first of all, didn't even say hello to him and just went right for it. And then one of the things she brought up was, she said, obviously you're racist because look essentially at the way you've attacked some of the prosecutors who are African American against you, as if it's the color of their skin. It was shocking, Greg. I mean, as opposed to saying, wait a minute, no, he's upset that he's getting railroaded.
No, it was the meritless nature of the charges against him that were trumped up against Trump. He at least had the courage to appear before the black journalists, which Kamala Harris has as yet to do. Now, she may do it remotely, but she didn't have the courage to show up herself. I'll give props to Trump for appearing knowingly in front of a hostile crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. He definitely, the crowd, Ed was even saying the crowd was cheering him on, ultimately even swayed the crowd.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg.
We love having you on. Thank you so much, Gregg Jarrett. Thank you.
Janine Pirro here for Colonial Metals Group. Colonial Metals Group helps Americans protect their future with the most trusted store of wealth in human history, physical gold and silver. If you're retiring or retired, go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/Pirro for your free Janine Pirro Colonial Metals Group Retirement Protection Kit, or call 800-965-8004. 800-965-8004 now to receive a free home safe and up to $7,500 in free silver.